Dr. Tyson is the curator who conceived of the Elena del Rivero home address project that is now touring across the country. We are hoping, fingers crossed, that we have a flag positioned in every one of the 50 states. And I should probably preface the beginning of this talk by noting specifically that the flag honors the passage of the 19th Amendment. So it's critical that a flag or one of Elena's works is represented in each one of the states in commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to John to begin our conversation with Elena. So Elena and John, welcome.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and thank you, Brittany, also. And let me start my slideshow. So this is the work that those of you who are joining us from Tampa are fortunate enough to be able to see. And as we've just heard, it's part of a broader project that's threaded through many different institutions called Home Address. And I guess I would say that maybe I'm less of a curator and more of a convener of that project, that there are many other folks who are involved in it, of course, including Joanna. And I think the title of this, Letter from Home, Suffrage, we've heard it commemorates suffrage. And as we'll talk about later on, I think in our session today, perhaps suffrage and access to voting continue to be important issues within the US today. But we're gonna, I think, begin by looking at letter writing in Elena's career. We'll then move into thinking about perhaps exchanges of different kinds, artistic and epistolatory, so written exchanges. We'll think a bit about the role of dish towels in her longer work and perhaps in her life a little bit as well. And then perhaps some bigger themes that we'll touch on are ideas about both feminist and feminine aesthetics, ethics, and politics, perhaps as well. So let me move on to my next slide. So Elena, you've been working with the letter as an artistic form for a very long time. And I wonder if you would mind sharing for us a little bit perhaps about this earlier series, Letter to the Mother, or about letter writing more generally in relationship to your work.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Brittany. So yes, I started with a letter format around 1990. Funny enough, when I was in Madrid last December, I went through my files and I realized that in the 70s, I was also writing letters without knowing at the time and formulating the idea of writing letters as I did afterwards. This series of letters to the mother start really when I read Letter to the Father by Kafka. That book really impressed me when I was very young. And when I was starting in a difficult time in my life, you know, and I went back to correspondence with myself about issues that were difficult to resolve, Kafka came back again to mind. Not only Kafka, but the correspondence of Madame de Sévigné also was very important for me. The love correspondence of Eloise and Abelard. Of course, Marina Tsvetaeva, this fantastic book that I read at in the late 80s probably, the correspondence of Boris Pasternak, Marina Tsvetaeva, and Rilke. It's called 1926. All those ingredients together helped me formulate what was going to be one of the biggest bodies of my work, Letters to the Mother, that I continue today. Probably more than 5,000 letters have been written so far. So I hope I have answered your question, Joan.
And I wonder if maybe you could tell us a little bit about the different kinds of processes you use in creating your letter to the mother. So perhaps we can start with what we're seeing here and then maybe go back to that first example that we had.
I started using paper because at the time I didn't have enough money to buy other materials. So I started with what it was around paper. Paper was cheap and easy, and ink. Sometimes I also used oil on paper because I like the translucency of the oil, the marking of the oil on the paper. Also, I started to stitch and sew using silk and thread. And with those ingredients, I started the first letters to the mother with oil, olive oil from the kitchen, and thread and graphite. Those was all the ingredients. All that was packed together by the typewriter that my father had used when we were going to the beach. And he kept writing his essays and his articles. My father was a scientist. And so that typewriter was the one I used for the titles, Letter to the Mother.
Wow, that's really fascinating. So woven through both parents. And I wonder, your letters for the most part, so they do have a little bit of typewriter intervention, but for the most part, they're almost like letters that don't have a written language, although they employ perhaps different visual languages. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the types of mark making, interventions with threads, maybe even the idea of the being a draftswoman that you often mention, as opposed to draftsmanship that many other people might use to describe having a great capacity for drawing.
It is true. The markings are very simple. Sometimes are just little strokes with the pen. And I use black ink most of the times. The markings are very important. They pace time. All these letter writings, these letters really are about the passage of time. They are about visual poetry too. I am a frustrated writer. So they have to do with the visual, not saying anything, and just with the title perhaps of Letter to the Mother conveys such a strong weight that you don't need to do much. Letters without saying nothing sometimes convey a very deep meaning, more when you repeat them ad infinitum, more when you have now 5,000. So repetition, repeating the same thing, repeating the same letter to the mother as I am doing today, charges the project with a big thing that goes beyond me, that goes beyond the mother, and it goes perhaps into this idea of the great mother that we are all.
And I'm just going to cycle through some of just a handful of examples from this series. And we can see that you return to similar strategies at times, that the forms are very different.
They are different because all these that you are seeing right now, they are etchings, in fact, with two plates. On top of them, the etchings, you know, the prints, I have a stitch. So at the end, they become collages, unique collages, because every one of them is different. Yes. With the word mother, mother, mother all the time repeated, again at infinitum.
And the work that we're seeing on the left-hand side of this of our screens right now, maybe brings up a notion that we'll perhaps touch on again as we move through the talk. But did you rip that in half and then stitch it together?
I ripped that in half and then it was stitched together. that was, I think, 1993. I don't remember well, but 1995. But at that time, I was already started to read works. I did that from the very beginning. In fact, I remember works from the 70s where I just turned the canvas and put it back together to create the idea of the wound, something that at the time I was not able to formulate as I am formulating it today. I stress the idea of the wound, the stitching, and the mending. I'm very interested in mending the work as a metaphor of mending life. Yes.
And I think that that idea of suturing also, of both maybe curing a wound with stitches, but perhaps also connecting two disparate things together is also something that we'll see through a lot of your work. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I think it's very symbolic, the idea of putting two things together that have been torn apart. Symbolically, it has a lot of meaning too, I think. So in that sense, I started to create all these ingredients that I today have in my work are not from today. They come from the 70s, because I am old, and they come fundamentally from the late 80s. All these ingredients, I mean, when you go back to my work, you see them there. Today, I am able to talk about them in a different way because the passage of time has also given me more knowledge about life, about my work, about how the work is related to the outer world, what's going on, the political dilemmas of today. So I'm able to talk about my work in a different way that I was when I was very young. I was doing things out of an impetus. They were things I needed to do and I needed to say. And with time, I have been thinking very much about them. Therefore, today I have a different way to explain the works, which is to explain myself too.
And apologies, this slide looks like it's slightly gone outside our screen, but the title is Unfinished Letter to a Young Daughter.
Yes.
And it occurs to me at the moment a question that I'm not sure I know the answer to, but did your first examples of the letter to the mother, and you can see similar strategies here in the unfinished letter to the young daughter, that also unfinished, but did these works start to get made when you moved to the United States, or were you making them in Spain already?
I was making the letters in Spain, but it was difficult there. I found when I came to this country a sense of freedom that I had never ever experienced in my country, even though I love the place I was born, Valencia, but I didn't find a freedom that this country allowed me to have, and the support I got here to do my work, even though it was not easy. The letter from Matt, when you talk about the letters to the mother, like in all my projects, is a huge project letter to the mother, and it has fractions. You just show one fraction that was letter to a young daughter. Those are, I think, 1,200 letters that form part of the big project, which is letter to the mother. Right now, I am in a different phase. I am writing letters to the mother, and they are called the censored letters to the mother. So this is the way for me to explain that the letters to the mother project has subtitles all the time, which explain different ways in life, perhaps, how I am changing and how I am moving. So it's all a big project, very similar to the one that we are going to talk afterwards, which is Letter from Home. Which Letter from Home is a very big project, the dish towels. And that big project has many subtitles also. And the last one is suffrage. The same with the letters to the mother. I hope it is explained clearly. Oh.
And I think that idea about a kind of radical openness is a big part of your work, that you're very willing to invite other people, explicitly name checking them at times, other times bringing up themes, other times alluding to their forms, is an important mode of your working. Do you find that in preparing or in your artistic process, does reading play a major component?
What do you mean by reading? My own reading, or reading the work as a...
Reading other authors. So you mentioned Kafka.
Yeah, well, I was an avid reader when I was very young. I read everything that came into my hands, especially English literature and Spanish literature as well. I have done series with many writers. I have a whole series dedicated to Teresa de Jesus, Saint Therese. You know, I have many, many works around that figure. I do not read today so much. I read poetry today, basically. And poetry allows me to dedicate a long time, sometimes just to a sentence, and a sentence is bringing me to many different places. So, but I have read in the past, and it is true that my readings informed my work tremendously. I think so. But I hope that it is also clear that I'm a visual art. I'm visual, you know. What preoccupies me foremost is how what we see could bring us to other places, how what we see and how it is displayed, very importantly, can help us understand things in the world, or at least pose questions. I like my work to pose questions very much. So I hope this is a good answer for you. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a good answer. So we certainly heard radical openness and the kind of flexibility and the absolutely maybe almost sort of monumental scale that you work with these very kind of small elements, which seems like a really interesting way of engaging with a large scale. And following from this, you shifted to working in a large scale, perhaps understood in a more traditional manner. Can you tell us about the process that led to these works?
This is Sweet Home. Sweet Home is a double entendre. It's written sweet, a sweet, very nice, and sweet, a suite of works, a number of works. And this is very much about the monstrosity of home. These large dish towels were presented at the Drawing Center, and I work here with Elizabeth Finch, and it was a lovely project, really, and I am very thankful to her. And this project was the outcome of a performance in the house. All those pieces of paper are made out of 4 sheets of abaca paper, 60 by 40 inches wide, that were on the floors of my studio for 6 months until they were partially destroyed. Once they were destroyed because people were coming to the house, because they were in the kitchen, because they were everywhere. They went back to Dieudonné paper mill. They passed them through water again. They pressed all of them. They came back to the studio, and I put them back together in the shape of huge, very large dish towels that were displayed at the Drawing Center in July 2001, just before 9/11, just before they came to the studio on 9/11, and they were partially damaged, and I restored them again. So they are charged with their performance in the house. They are charged with being displayed at the Drawing Center in New York, and they are charged because they were damaged with the 9/11 explosion of the World Trade Center just across the street from home. Yes. And they are paper. It was the first time that I decided to use paper in such a big scale. I had never done it before because it was difficult at the time to produce these large works of paper just in one go. I resolved the problem by having 4 sheets, 60 by 40, and stitching them together. All these things that you see, the lines, are done by embroidering the paper with thread, cotton thread. And in the middle, you see how the papers have been put together because of them going through so much damage on the floors and then passing them through water again. You see how the shapes, you know, are not totally even. In the middle, you see paper, which was used to put them together like healing wounds. In fact, all the markings that you see on the paper are dirt from being on the floor and taking all the damage for 6 months of walking and eating on top of them and doing everything with them, literally everything.
And you were inspired by these, by a kind of field of different things. So let's see if we can have a look at that. So you mentioned that you collect dish towels yourself?
I do collect dish towels. Mainly I do collect dish towels, the French torchon. It is my inspiration, among other things, you know. I remember back in Spain in the 70s with the support surface movement, 68, 70. It was major in Spain, even though we were under the cloud of Franco times and informalism. But those pieces that I saw from the French artists really made a big impression on me. Buren, of course, but mostly François Viala and Noel Dola. And they remained with me for years. And I owe a lot to them for what I am doing today. That movement was very close to arte povera. And I find myself close to arte povera. They use very simple elements and very simple, those are common dish towels, you know, ink were not extremely good. And it was around. And in my work, I use very simple elements as well. I work from home, close to the kitchen. I cook while I am working. The stains from the kitchen travel to my work. I welcome them. I sometimes force them to travel to my works. And that is to say that they were big inspiration for me, indeed. Yes. And all these dish towels are influenced by those artists, arte povera, support surface, working with what is around, with what is at hand. And work for me also important, very important, has to convey something deep. Sometimes when I go to see shows, when I admire the work the most is when the work hurts sometimes, it hurts. I don't know what people will think to see dish towels, which are in every home, when they are so monstrous and when they are so dirty, displayed as what we call works of art. I hope they carry meaning to them, and I hope they enjoy, and the dish towels present questions to them. That's my hope.
And I guess the art historian in me cannot help but think about this longer history of grids that is often associated with kind of great originality. And I would just note that it's very often male artists who use that form, but of course, women have been engaging with it in kind of feminine coded spaces, such as the kitchen or wiping down a tea set. And so I think it's interesting how you're recuperating that form as well, and showing us an alternative history, perhaps.
I don't know what came first. If minimalism of working at home, women sewing and stitching and doing the same pattern over and over again. Now we are seeing those works and we wonder. But yes, yes, you are right. It's very interesting to see Piet Mondrian next to a dish towel. In fact, it would be a good point to see Piet Mondrian next to a common dish towel and next to, for instance, a cloviella. Why not? It would be very interesting to me. This brings back to the idea of feminism that you mentioned before. And yes, of course I am a feminist. I am. I think everybody should be a feminist because feminism is a revolution, not because it is a revolution, but because it is a civil rights movement. We should all abide by it. At the time when I was young, I was part of the feminism of the difference. I am not today anymore because I want to welcome everybody wherever they come from, male, female, trans, whatever. They, them, he, she, everybody is welcome because feminism goes beyond women today. It is something that goes beyond us. We were the ones that created it. We owe a lot to those women in England, the suffragists, when they were going out claiming from their rights, and they would come home and the doors will be locked and they didn't have the keys to come back home. The husband were preventing them from coming home. Yes, it is true that we owe this movement to them, but today we have to welcome all different ways to be in the world. It is a free choice.
And I think that is maybe a nice lead in to the movements of the dish towels, right? So thinking about women going into the streets, out of the kitchen, and a similar sort of operation is happening here with this intervention. Can you tell us about this project?
Well, I always wanted to do a public project with my dish towels. I found so many problems and so much difficulty, and everything was so expensive that one day I decided I was going to do a public project myself. So that I took my dish towels, I went to the park just across the street from home, 6 a.m. in the morning to avoid the police, even though I had problems with the police later on because I did it during quite a few days, probably a few months. You know, some of the photographs, when I was developing the film, were not completely right. I was in a difficult scenario. I was with my Hasselblad. I was taking only black and white film. This is hand colored. So I decided to hang my dish towels from the trees and photograph them as if a performance had taken place and as if it was a public project from the city of New York. So I did it. I did it. Later on, I got the Guggenheim precisely with this kind of project. And it was what helped me and gave me strength to continue with the suffrage movement project. So I owe it to the Guggenheim and to the Anonymous Was a Woman and to you, John, and so many people that are helping to put together this public project where a flag, a dish towel in the shape of a torsion, dirty, will go up in public institutions across the country to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the passing of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. At that time in 1920, it was delayed because of the Spanish flu. And today I have to take it with a grain of salt that my project is being delayed because of the pandemic COVID-19. So I'm doing it with the help of a lot of people. It is not a costly project because the flags are being produced at a very low cost. And we are doing it. We are doing it. I am doing it. So I am quite satisfied that I was able to do it. Something that I learned when I got this grant from Creative Capital from the Warhol. And one day, because I am European and they were pushing me to be more aggressive, someone told me, when you write your grant applications, Elena, you have to write them telling the people that are going to read your essays that you are going to do them no matter what. You are going to do your work no matter what. That stayed with me forever. So I'm doing my project and my work no matter what. Thankfully, on my path, I'm finding people like you, John, like Joanna, like Eugenia Sucri at Galeria Enrique Faria, like my gallery in Spain as well. I'm finding people like Courtney Gilbert and Andrea Anderson and Diana Baumbach that are helping me. And all together we are creating like a kind of family. We all know each other, we ask for help, and this is becoming quite a beautiful project that I am enjoying a lot. And I think the people around me are enjoying it as well.
So I think I just want to mention one more thing, and then perhaps another member of that family, Joanna, can come in as well. But I would just note that you're doing really interesting things with the suffrage ideas, as you mentioned before. It happens both inside and outside, and you're Frederick Douglass, maybe not someone who many people would think of as a great modernist. Maybe people know him as an anti-slavery activist, a women's rights activist, but of course he was also very adept at using photography, wrote extensively about photography. So I think your work really illuminates him in a fascinating way. I don't know if you want to say anything else, or maybe let Joanna come in now.
That flag that you presented called Suffrage is dedicated to him. And this is what I was explaining before. That dish towel, large, it has been painted with my body. And with ingredients coming also from the kitchen. So I take all these dish towels that were presented at the Enrique Faria Gallery to celebrate suffrage. And the show was dedicated to Alice B. Toklas. Speak of all these issues that I am very concerned about: women, home, how the home protects us, issues about seriality, issues about letter writing, issues about healing, about mending our lives.
So I think that's a good note for us to finish on. And here's Joanna.
That was wonderful. Thank you, John and Elena. We have a few questions in our Q&A, but I want to go ahead and ask the two of you a couple of questions before we answer some of the questions from our audience. How did this collaboration begin? John, how were you introduced to Elena's work? How did you become interested in kind of organizing this project and wanting to share it with institutions, curators across the country?
So it was actually through the gallerist Janice Guy, who I'd been an intern for quite some time ago, that I met Elena. So this, I guess, sort of a kind of network of connections started there and has continued to expand outwards. So I think must have been in early 2017, I did a studio visit with Elena, and I had been working at the National Gallery, so had seen the Women's March and thought, oh, this work seems kind of perfectly engaged with that. And as a result of the upcoming 19th Amendment anniversary, we thought that was a moment that it made sense to kind of continue some of that energy and bring these works out into the public sphere.
That's wonderful. And Elena, I know that we have been talking a lot about, where else the flag can be mounted, in particular here in the South, because we have such an interesting history, very traumatic history in regards to voting rights here in the South. And I know that, John, if you could put back your slide of where the flag currently is, if you wouldn't mind. So I know right now, I know that there's 2 institutions in Louisiana, several in the north.
These are
and it's making its way across to the West Coast and the Northwest. But I think it's incredibly significant to look at where the positioning of these two, where we are in the South right now. I know that I think New Orleans, they opened about maybe a month or so before we opened in Tampa. And it's quite interesting in thinking about how all of these how this all aligned in a way. I was interested in particular in bringing it to the Tampa Museum of Art because in 2018, beginning of 2019, our executive director, Michael Tomore, had approached the curatorial team and asked us to think about doing programming around the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote. We hosted an exhibition of women photographers titled Modern Vision, Modern Women, from the Bank of America collection, which kind of kicked off that year of exhibitions, followed by an exhibition that Brittany and her colleague Cassandra Abel organized from our Antiquities collection titled Her Story, Ancient Heroines and Everyday Women from Antiquity. And then followed by an exhibition that was postponed due to COVID from our own collection, looking at women photographers. And then I thought that bringing your work in really rounded out not only the calendar and the celebration of this 100th anniversary, but in general, this was the first, and the only contemporary project we were looking at or thinking about, and especially in regards to, with our collection, it was really important that we had a living artist, I think, represent what that celebration, what that anniversary looked like. So we did this really quickly. I think, Elena, we started talking with you maybe in October of last year, September, October, and we got this up pretty quickly. But it's interesting that in some of the research I was doing early on, when we were just starting to conceive of the 100th anniversary at Tampa, that the suffragette movement started in Tampa in 1883 by a woman named Ella McWilliams Chamberlain. And for those of you who are from Tampa in our audience tonight, you might recognize that name. There is a monument dedicated to her on the Riverwalk here in downtown Tampa. Ella had moved to Florida. She was originally from Iowa, and she attended a women's rights conference in Iowa. And by the time she and her husband moved to Tampa, she was just straight out the gate penning essays for the newspaper and advocating for women's rights. And so that movement started right here in our backyard, and she went on to represent Florida at voting rights conferences and really was, kind of the instigator for getting this movement started here in such a kind of very powerful, grassroots way. After the passage of the 19th Amendment, Ella then went on to advocate for prisoners' rights and to do charity work for the African-American community. So there's a lot of, I think, deep resonance with kind of where that history is rooted here in Tampa, with, I think, Elena, with so many of the ideas that you are looking at in your project. And I think even with some of John's own work, just that really wonderful crossover. I personally have to say that in Elena, when you're talking about all these kind of personal connections, again, it was wonderful how this all came full circle, because I've also worked with Enrique Faria in my previous institution, who has just been really wonderful and instrumental in shaping a lot of my curatorial ideas. So if he's still on the line, I just want to say thank you to Enrique, because he's just a wonderful person. So it was wonderful to have Enrique, Elena, and John to meet you as well, and then to also just be part of this larger camaraderie of curators across the country. It's been really—
That's right. And Joanna, I just want to say that the first flag that was hung was outside Enrique Faria Gallery at the opening of House Brownies dedicated to Alice B. Toklas. That was the first one. And the second one, curiously enough, was at the Spanish consulate in Spain. Santiago, I want to say thank you to Santiago if he's around. He allowed me to hang my dish towel next to the Spanish flag and the European flag. I am very thankful for that shot. It is very important to have an anti-monument, which I consider my project. I consider my project the anti-monument, and to be able to display the anti-monument next to a flag of a country, Spain, my country, which is about monuments. So this is a tour de force for me. It's very important. So I am very thankful also to Santiago Herrero, Consul of Spain in New York, for fighting and allowing me to do this. Thank you.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting that when you talked about, how the 19th Amendment, how so much of that movement had to be put on pause because of the Spanish flu, which was very much in line with what happened last year, where everything just kind of stopped for a moment across the board. And thinking about that historically, I just wanted to point out, and I have this information because I was researching this for another project that, of course, I think we're all still grappling with the closures across the country. And here in Florida, things have been opening up for several months. But I think it's also important to note that the Spanish flu arrived in Tampa in September of 1918. And it had, by that time, I think about 25% of Hillsborough County, for those of you who are here in Tampa, were sick, that they caught the Spanish flu, which of course had devastating effects across the board with the production at the cigar factories, and it really wreaked havoc on the economy here in Tampa over 100 years ago. So when we think about how kind of history is cyclical, it's very much so impacted Tampa's local history. So there's so many things that really resonate with your project, Elena, and I just wanted to make sure I was able to share that information with our audience. Okay. The last question I have for you, because we have had a few more questions trickle in, I want to make sure we get to them, is just, Elena, based on where the flags have been mounted across the country, have you noticed that the flags have, that their symbolism, that it means different things in different parts of the country? I know you're working with curators, from, kind of in so many different places, and we bring to this project our own local histories. What has that meant to you, and what have you learned kind of along the way? And John as well, feel free to chime in.
To me, this project has brought to me friendship, basically. I think it's a public project, and it is a wonderful project because it is putting people together. Public because it's about the community. I couldn't ask for better. It's the best project I have done in my life, public project, because it is uniting the community. People are helping. People are trying to find new venues for us. It has not been easy. I'm not going to say it has been easy, no. But the idea that everybody has become so friendly with each other, people that John didn't know, now he's able to talk to them on a one-to-one basis. I've had the help from the gallery, Enrique Faria, especially Eugenia Sucre, who has been instrumental in putting together all this information, and I am so thankful. And she has been corresponding to all these people. So the beauty of this project is community and basically friendship. You cannot ask for anything better.
Thank you, Elena.
I guess I would just briefly say that exactly the kinds of new relationships also that the work can take on when it's installed in a different space, as you really nicely explained, Joanna. Elena mentions Pankhurst's Deeds Not Words, and that was the title of Courtney Gilbert's exhibition at Sun Valley Museum of Art, so that the work took on a kind of slightly different inflection there. I think that's one of the really compelling things about this work, that it has enough openness that it can speak to our continuing issues with suffrage or lack of access to suffrage, can relate to very specific histories, and then speak also a more kind of universal language.
Fantastic. Why don't we get to some of our questions? Let's see. Elena, so would the dish towels connect to letters to the mother, maybe because of expected gender roles and such?
Do the letters to the mother connect to letters from home because of the idea that I am a feminist? Is that the question?
I believe so, or because of just...
Well, the letters to the mother is such a big body of work. And it relates to, that's a good question. To letters from home. It's all about letter writing to start with. I started letters from home later on. Why did I start letters from home when I had done Swiss Home at the Drawing Center in 2001? And this letter from home starts in 2012, I think 2013. One day I was sending something to a friend, and I just wrote, "This is a letter from home," and I draw a dish towel. And I didn't know what I was doing, but later on the day, I remember thinking, oh, what a great idea to write letters from home with the dish towels in the background. And it started like that. Most things start in a very simple way. And it only requires for you to be alert to what's happening around. And this is all I can say. Perhaps they are together because I do everything on the table of my kitchen. I don't know.
And sort of a nice follow-up to that is another question then. How does the unfinished letter to a young daughter describe you and how you feel, or how does it connect to you?
Most of the work is done by me. However, I have to stress the fact that when I do my work and the work leaves me or it is finished, it becomes something else. That is to say that even though it springs from me, it is not necessarily about me. It is about things that I see in the world. It connects to other issues that preoccupy me. And at the end of the day, they are metaphors that I am using. Of course, I am the one that is making them. Something in me should be there, yes, but I pretend as an artist to go beyond me. My aim is metaphor, always. And so I hope the metaphor is there for the one that is asking the question, and I hope it's a good answer. I don't know, metaphor.
It's interesting because our questions seem to be following, kind of having a really nice train of thought with what you're saying. We have another question that says, could you speak a bit about the concept of beauty? So,
concepts of beauty. Beauty, I suppose, is on the beholder. I don't think necessarily I work with the idea of creating beauty, because beauty springs from the truth. Therefore, I would say truth is the beauty. The beauty is truth. I'm trying to be close to who I am and close to the truth. Most important, I'm only trying to ask questions to myself and ask questions to the one that is going to contemplate the work. Is that beauty? It could. Is beautiful a work by Goya where someone is cutting the head of someone? Perhaps. But most important than beauty per se is truth, I think.
that was beautifully said, Elena. Another question, the Sweet Home Address series of works poetically capture the residue of domestic life, both in the home and studio with certain intimacy. How do you feel the work shifts when presented in the public sphere?
That is a very good question. It changes very much indeed. I show my work with galleries, and it is a different scenario, even though I have to say my last exhibition here in New York was like a public project in a private gallery. I was very happy with how it looked. But when I come out of the YQ, the work has a different connotation. Most important with this project that I'm doing with John and with all of you, it has no connotation to the commercial. Therefore, there is total freedom. It is true that I need to live, I need to eat, I need to make money somewhere, but these are the projects that most engaged me. It is true also that I am able to do this project because I am in the studio working with all those dish towels that Enrique Faria, the huge one that he had in the gallery. I'm working with those at home, and one day I discover something, and another day I just do a dish towel. The first one, I have to say, here I live in New York at the Cristadora, across the street from Tompkins Square. I went to the board of the Cristadora building and I said, listen, we have a pole. I need this dish towel to hang from the pole. I need a photograph to show people what I want to do. And they say, but Elena, a dish towel. And finally they say, okay. So I was able to do a public project with nothing, cheap, in my own home, with the people around me, all hanging the dish towel. We went to the park, people taking photographs. People asked me, what country is that flag from, you know? I said, I think it is from home. And they all started to laugh in Tompkins Square. So this is, to me, about trauma and also about being happy. So both things are together, the yin yang, because there is trauma in some of these works. There is trauma in suffrage, a lot of trauma. There is a lot of trauma in letters to the mother, big time, you know, a lot of suffering. And this brings back to me George Orwell. We are all the same, but some more than others in Animal Farm. So we all suffer the same, yes, in life, but some more than others. We are having all those people crossing the borders right now. I want my flag in the border to start a movement about voting rights again. That is what I want. I want my flag in the border. Get me my flag in Rio Grande, please. Hanging from a tree. Just let me go there and take a photograph. I have the project.
Well, this is a great follow-up question. Has the lockdown during the pandemic brought other perspectives into the notion of home in your ongoing embodiment of the tension that exists between protection and oppression in the home, especially knowing that domestic violence has increased enormously during this period? And you're talking about kind of trauma and speaking to that notion of trauma in your work. How has that changed during this whole time period?
Well, the trauma hasn't changed. The trauma normally stays, and you percolate through it with yoga, meditation, and trying to cope with things like we cope with life. I don't have an answer right now for all the trauma that a lot of women have suffered during this confinement, and I am aware that they have suffered a lot, like all the children that are without food, even in Spain, my country. I have not answered. The answer perhaps is voting. We have to vote. Perhaps it is that we have to be engaged and have policies that, even though we live in a capitalist country, have connotations to the social, because we are not free until everybody is really free and everybody has a home and everybody has school and food. And then we can talk of freedom. I don't know what else to say.
That was, I think, very well said, Elena. We have two more questions. Was the use of the thread that stitched the letter together to show that an injury or a fight with a mother is never going to be permanent and can be fixed? Or is it that a mother will always be injured and making sacrifices for her kids, or something different?
Well, very nice question. My work goes beyond that, even though we all suffer as daughters and as mothers. It is part of the civilization we have. I don't know why they teach at school that you have to love your mother so that it is easier for them and for us. Well, there are wounds that are never healed, I suppose. Mothers and daughters have a difficult time. They have had in the past, they have today, and they will. I don't know why. I ask that question to myself every day. It is the way it is. We have to kill our parents to progress. There is another quote there for you. Without contradiction, there is no progression. This is from The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. So that's all I have to say.
And then our last question from Courtney Gilbert. Elena, I've heard you speak about the idea of the kitchen as a political space, as well as a domestic space. I wonder if you could elaborate on that idea.
Well, thank you, Courtney. How are you? The kitchen for me is the political place par excellence. And there is where I work. Why is a political place par excellence for me as a woman? Women, even though the kitchen on the one hand was the prison, the greed, the kitchen allowed them to have conversations about issues that pertain to them. The kitchen was a place of freedom for them, even though it was a prison. So in that contradiction is where I move. I also move on a tight rope with all these issues because I have to fine tune a lot to not to fall. But yes, I believe the kitchen is a political place par excellence. It has been in the pandemic a political place. Where are those people but in the kitchen with mommy and cooking? Where are they but in the kitchen? It was more important than the White House, please. So it was more important than the White House. The kitchen, mothers, and home did something that governments couldn't do. They couldn't help people because they didn't have the social programs. Homes did. Again, going back to George Orwell, some better than others, because some people lived in tiny, tiny little holes. Others had big places in the country. So I will finish by saying we are all the same, but some more than others. Something to be very much aware of.
Thank you so much, Elena. I'm actually going to throw in one last question to both you and John. Now that we have, we're coming to the close of home address at the Tampa Museum of Art. We will take the flag down at the end of the month. Elena and John, if you could both tell us what other projects you're working on or what you have coming up on the horizon so we can keep our eye on you and follow you once the project closes here in Tampa.
So I think I'd like Elena to have the last word, if that's okay. And that's all just very briefly. So we are still hoping to find more venues. We've got some others in the works, but these ones confirmed for sure. I guess I'm also working on stemming from project, a book on Hans Haacke. So continuing to think about critiquing institutions through his work. And Elena can maybe tell us more about the book that we are hoping to create together. So I will stop there.
Yes, with all the institutions together and all the sites, we are going to put a book about the home address. All the institutions will be there. Every curator from each institution will be invited to write about suffrage in their own territories. John will have the main essay, which is wonderful. And we hope to put this project together. And I hope the Spanish consulate, again, we have a fantastic consul from Spain in New York, Santiago Herrero. He is willing to help artists in these difficult times because they are difficult for artists. So we will keep you posted as soon as we have more venues. We are talking to more people. I think Montana is coming next. I think Massachusetts, John is coming soon also. And hopefully more and more will come to join in our big family, and we will be able to put together that catalog with all of you. And hopefully it will be a historical book about 100 years later, pandemia, COVID involved. I hope we succeed. Yes.
And thanks to Andrea Anderson, our project will live on digitally at least as well. So thanks to Rivers Institute, we have a digital platform where it can exist too. So thank you also to Andrea for that.
Yeah, well, it was lovely. I hope everybody understood a little bit more of the project, and thank you for coming to the talk from all over the world, because I hear there are people from Spain and from here and from Germany. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. We've had our audience chime in from all over the world. Elena, this has been truly a wonderful kind of meeting of art and beauty, and just really provided us with a lot of thought today for this Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
So my thanks to you, Elena. Thank you, John, for joining us or for being part of this dialogue with Elena. It's been really wonderful to have you part of the team today.
Thank you, Brittany, too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
So long. Bye.